Well, I want to ask a question between the New World Order, Majestic 12, and the alien influence New World Order. How are the aliens influencing the New World Order?
Well, it's my take on it that they are our progeny. They are future humans. Mm-hmm. That's the part that Dan Burish has made in various ways, and I've interviewed him for 100 hours on camera, 100 hours off camera, so I know him and his family as much as any person that's not actually in the family. I was best man at his wedding. I was there when he got his divorce. I was there when he went on his honeymoon. That brings up something really interesting, his honeymoon. He went on the Queen Mary, which when they got back, I brought him to Bob Wood's house. So Bob Wood met him and his new wife at, I don't remember what year that was, 3 or 4 years ago, whatever. And Dan Burish has his own bodyguards. He carries like a pager in his pocket. If he pushes that pager, there'll be armed guards at his side within 15 minutes. And his apartment, I've seen the weapons. He has automatic weapons. He's a crack shot. Both he and his wife are target people. I was going to videotape them at the target range in Vegas, but I never did. But to them, this is serious. To me, it's serious. I've traveled to 6 countries. I've hired 3 different private investigators in the United States. I have my own personal armed bodyguard when I need it. So people out there need to know that this is serious, serious business. I at one point contacted the Royal Mounted Police of Canada. So it's taken a lot of time and money and effort to gather this information.
Basically, I'm trying to figure out how strongly the Majestic members are influencing the New World Order or vice versa.
Yeah, well, my take is that they're intermingled in a way. It's hard to separate.
Right.
And there are these people. I'm placing a lot of faith in McConnell because this transition, because I told Dan Burish that my car was broken into 3 times. I filed police reports. My apartment was entered in Huntington Beach. And when I told him that, he ordered Majestic to stand down, as far as I'm concerned. So after 05, 06, I never had any more problems. So that's kind of clout that he has through McConnell. I'll give you another little vignette, which is apropos what I was saying earlier, is that these beings are toxic. That's why the jrod was in this clean sphere, totally controlled environment. And Dan Burish had to be in a TES, totally encapsulated suit, because we didn't want to contaminate them or vice versa. So Dan Burish, he goes into great detail in my videos, is that when he comes to work at Area 51 S4, he has to strip down to the nude and be weighed and make sure that he hasn't hidden something in some orifice of his body. And you're weighed when you leave. And when you're at your workstation, you're being weighed. So I talked to John Lear about this, and he said that I asked John if Bob Lazar was weighed. He said no. That when Bob Lazar was at Area 51 S4, he took a little tiny camera, took it in there, and put it in the stanchion of a chair. And he could take a picture and bring it out. And then when he was people don't know, Bob Lazar was never fired. He just left because he was afraid that he went back out there, he'd never come back. He'd be his bones in the desert. But so they found the camera. This is John Lear talking. And the camera was what decided from then on, Dan Burish, everybody else had to be weighed in the nude. And so they have to go that protocol all the time, every time they go there. And Dan at one point was going there a couple times a week. And just another aside, I like this part of the story, is that Dan Burish, microbiologist, specially trained, at State University of New York at Stony Brook. And he was trained specifically to work with the jrod. And Edward Teller paid for his education at State University of New York. And on my site, my other site, what I'm calling my academic site, area51jrod.com, I have all the documents. Originally, I had 95 documents. I cut it down to 45 now, and it was just too much. But you can download all those documents. It's PhD. The PhD from State University at Stony Brook has been erased, but we have another one, a substitute one that's up there. I have letters from the dean where he's on the honor list, straight A. He got one B, B plus or something in Spanish, but he's a very intelligent person, and he thinks in terms of fractals. I introduced him to J.J. Hurtak, and who wrote the book Keys of Enoch, and it's all about these other dimensions and the fractal images. So he's a pretty good artist, and his wife is pretty good too. So they have given me a lot of information because, you know, back 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was the designated hitter for this information getting to the general public. And wherever you want to go from there.
Well, Bob was, I think, asking the question, I've got a question, but Bob was asking the question, how much influence do the extraterrestrials have on the current state of affairs on the planet, such as the New World Order and where that's all headed? But before you answer, I had a question. I've had a number of people tell me that they've been to Area 51, and every one of them, without exception, has said there are no aliens there, or at least they didn't meet an alien there. I'm assuming that is because the ETs are actually at S4, which is not really Area 51.
That's right, yeah.
To the south.
Exactly right, yeah. Yeah, as far as the New World Order, I don't know, you know, and I always say either I know or I don't know. I try and stay away from the word belief. That's a toxic word to me, because belief implies religion, or, you know, either you know or you don't know, or it's a maybe. So all of the New World Order has to do with what we were discussing a few minutes ago about timelines, and that if certain things happen, it changes the timeline. So when Dr. Dan Burish changes the genome of an extraterrestrial, this changes their whole culture. And just an aside, I love this little vignette about Dan interacting with the jrod. Now, he interacted with the jrod for 2 years, 94, 95, and some maybe of 96. He's a being from another star system, but they consider themselves friends. So what do friends do? What do you do when you're talking to your friend? You start talking about your childhood, or where you came from, and so forth. So the jrod asked Dr. Dan Burish, you know, what happened in your childhood? What was it like, you know? So Dan Burish started reflecting on his childhood and watching cartoons. So he starts telling him about Cecil and the C6 sea serpent. And that was the cartoon that he watched, and that he liked, you know, I'm coming, Beanie Boy, I'm coming, Beanie Boy. So people in this room are old enough to remember it. People watching probably wouldn't. But from then on, the jrod, as sort of a joke, called Dan Burish B&E. He didn't call him Beanie. B&E, he separated his syllables. B&E. He said B&E this, B&E that. So the jrod's asking him, B&E, you know, what other images the child had? And so Dr. Burish says, well, one of my favorite times as a child was going to Yosemite Park and the waterfalls and the beautiful trees and everything. So he's imaging this in his mind. The jrod's reading it. Everything is telepathic with the being. So the jrod just let out a sigh. Oh, it's wonderful. the water, the green. And on his planet, it's very dry and it's hot. They have 2 suns. And that's why, in my opinion, they have the double eyelids, because they have to filter out the heavy sunlight. So one of the reasons they like to come here is a nice vacation. We got all this water and dim sunlight and things, and their relatives that from their past, what we consider our future. So if they're here and they're interacting, and gets into depth what you just asked, Bob, which is, this is something that in-depth researchers don't get, is that how many different races, several hundred on planet Earth? Well, how many different races are there in the solar system?
Right.
And they don't all get along. We all lump them together, you know, like in Independence Day, oh, come down, save us, Jesus, and all that. No. The Nordics are really good, you know, and some group of Nordics Hitler hooked into. At some point, they cut Hitler loose, you know, for whatever reason down the, you know, whatever. That's another whole discussion about South America and Antarctica, and we get back into that, which we can do. But from my research, I don't know, Bob, and yours, there's, I think, actually more sightings in South America than in North America. I don't know. But A.J. Gavard, you know, we have on Coast to Coast, Peter Davenport said there's like 5,000 a month or something. Well, if there's more in South America, and there's a difference in the abductions, which I've never quite figured out. I've wanted to ask A.J. Gavard that, is that the people in South America seem to be more reluctant at abduction. They hold on to trees and branches and as they're taken aboard the ship. And I might as well throw this in here right now. I don't remember being abducted myself, but when I was a teenager, I had some serious nosebleeds. And I broke my nose playing football, so there's something going on in my nose that I don't know about. But in 1995 or 96, when John Mack's book came out, I was with a group of abductees out in Thousand Oaks with Roger Lear and some other people. And on the way home, I was on the freeway on the 101, and then about 2 hours, it was like 2 in the morning when I noticed the time, then about 3:30, I was on the 10 freeway coming from Santa Monica. Now there's a on-ramp from the 101 into the 10, but that means I would have had to get off the off-ramp, get back on the freeway to come back. So that's missing time that I have. Now I've never been regressed, so I don't know about, you know, the details of that. I never felt the need to that. And I often say to people, they say, well, should I be regressed? And I say, well, if nothing's bothering you, not a good idea to wake sleeping dogs. Just my opinion. But if something's bothering you, yeah, if there's some trauma, but I wouldn't do it unless there's some real reason for it. But A.J. Gavard and the other researchers in South America talk about the natives and the people being, you know, taken aboard, I mean, really fighting it big time. So that may be one group of ETs that have infiltrated the German contingent in South America. And that's a whole nother thing that should be researched with A.J. Gavard, because if Operation Paperclip and we brought all these Gestapo intelligence, you know, Nazi intelligence people, they just fit right into the CIA. And the Gestapo would be so happy with having everything revealed in the populace. They know whatever, they know we're sitting here and doing this. They know everything. My phone, I'm sure, is tapped. I just figure that it is. Linda Howe, everybody says. But that leads me to just question that maybe these intelligence groups are trying to hear what one group of ET is talking to another group of ET about. You know, there's some, and there's some database someplace where these different intelligence groups are feeding information about which group is doing what and how that changes a timeline. Now, I think, this is just my speculation, that the way New World Order and all of this esoteric things works, you have to be at perpetual war. The only way you can hide these budgets is if you're at war. So we've been in perpetual war. We lost in Korea, we lost in Vietnam, we lost in Afghanistan, we lost in Iraq. Someplace, somebody's got to get it that we can't control the world with our military. We're not the international police force. But they have to have it. The cabal, which is what, like 5 corporations control all the money. So they've got to be having the war so they can hide money and launder it through different sources and all of that. And so I think that the revelation has to come, I say this to people, I don't know for sure, it has to come from the grassroots. Well, you can't get more grassroots than Ron Garner sitting here in January of 2015 with 3 people trying to figure all this out. This is as grassroots as it gets. And I think that this information, if it's disseminated in a way that other in-depth researchers, now I'm sure there's people like Ron Garner out there that have not gone public very much. I've only given a couple talks here and there, at Rachel, Nevada a few times and so forth. But I've interviewed John Lear in great depth. I really know a lot about Bob Lazar. Now, Corso said that we are at war with aliens. And at chapter 17 of his book, The Day After Roswell, he lays it out. But he says that they're clones. And how do you know that they're a clone? Well, I tell people, ask them to show you their belly button. If they don't have a belly button, then they got to be a clone. And that's what the images from alien autopsy are, is a being with a pop belly and no belly button and no genitals, or not that they showed anyway, which brings up this issue of the black ops and the controversy over alien autopsy film. The big issue on and off when it first came, was it true or not true? That's the way humans think. It's black or it's white. There's no in between. But everything with this group of intelligence people is in between. That's what they do. And there's this term called a meme. You need to look that up. A meme is an idea that's put out there, and that becomes a part of the genre. And the meme of this autopsy was that there was an autopsy. And I have an autopsy that Dan Burish saw, and Anonymous saw, and most people don't know, but Bob Lazar saw. So this meme, one of the important parts of it is that in the alien autopsy showed there was 2 eyelids. Now, Philip Corso, in his interview, said that the autopsy film that he saw at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, that the Army showed him, showed that the that there were 2 eyelids. And at that time, nobody knew about 2 eyelids. So the black ops, in my opinion, show this film of a being with 2 eyelids. That's putting it out there. And Corso says in his book and on camera that eyelid is a light gathering. That's what the night vision came from. The night vision was the eyelid that gathers light, so the ET people can see in the dark. So Corso said that his boss sent him to, I forgot which company right now, but they were working on night vision, but it was as big as a tank or a hauler or something. And so Corso went there with an envelope. He said, sometimes I'm Scrooge. This time I'm Santa Claus, because here's $60 million. That's the good news. The bad news is that you have to build this night vision goggles. That's what the money's for. The bad news, you got to do it in 12 months, because our soldiers need it in Vietnam. So the technology that they got from the ET people saved lives of lots of soldiers in Vietnam. In the same way with the computer chip. They don't say this is from an alien ship. They just say it's from an Italian helicopter. It's from a Russian MiG or whatever, you know. And so my take is that Corso got a bad rap, all because of Hollywood. And he just didn't get his story out there. Now, I've been talking to Philip Corso Jr. People don't know it, but Philip Corso wrote a book called The Day After Dallas. Now, what does that mean? That means that Corso was in the White House at the same time that Anonymous was in the White House, the late 50s, early 60s. They probably passed in the hall at some point. Anonymous says that that he thinks he saw Corso's boss one time in the White House, but didn't know for sure. What's Trudeau? Trudeau.
I had two questions. One, are we putting McConnell in any jeopardy by talking about him on this video?
Oh, he probably has more bodyguards than anybody, than the president. But just an aside there, with McConnell, when I was hiring these private investigators to go after Kissinger and these other people, and I mentioned McConnell, he said, "Are you crazy? I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. This is the director of all the spooks in the world. Give me a break. I wouldn't do it for $100 million. No, the private investigator that I hired to check out some of the members of Majestic, where they live, what they do, what's going on. He gave me some information, but...
Do you know anything about John Alexander?
Yeah, he's a criminal, in my opinion.
Why's that?
Because he's a disinformation specialist. He's come around a little bit in later years, but he says there's no cover-up and blah, blah, blah. And there was one at the International Congress a few years ago, some speaker didn't show up, so Bob Brown put him in there, Alexander in there. And people booed him off the stage. The guy is this total disinformation. He's modified it a little bit, but then Bob Brown went up and told him, "You'll never be invited to hear again. What you have to set up there is total baloney."
Earlier, you were talking about the idea that jrod said that he was happy he was here because it was so hot on his planet where there were two suns. Does that in any way relate to the story about Project Serpo?
I think it does, but I don't know how. I didn't buy the Serpo story originally. Dan Burish didn't buy it. But now that I studied a little bit more, I think there's something to it. Just what and how, I can discuss that a little bit if you want. Serpo was fascinating.
But the question is, did any of your whistleblowers have Serpo-related evidence?
Just tangentially, not directly, except for Dan Burish. Dan Burish was working with this jrod in the mid-90s. And toward the end of 96, normally when Dan Burish would go into the clean sphere, he had to take one step forward, feet together. One step forward, feet together, like in a wedding ceremony. That was respect for this ambassador, in quotes, from another star system. So, and the protocol was never turn your back on this person. So he, late in their relationship, would approach the jrod, and the jrod, as a joke, because jrod had a great sense of humor. They were joking around a lot. And the jrod, as a joke, made a step toward him for the first time in 2 years. Well, this frightened Dan so much, he caught his heel on the grated floor and fell backwards on his filter pack because he had a totally encapsulated suit and it was filtered through the back. So the jrod then, he didn't jump, he was sick. He sort of loped over. I mean, they had to clean him up. He was drooling and vomiting. He was a sick person. So jrod climbed up on Dan's chest and downloaded all his information. People in the Black Ops called Dan Burish a galactic encyclopedia because the jrod had all this information that he downloaded. And Dan Burish has this eidetic memory, this memory that you can remember everything. You can ask Dan Burish right now, when he was at Long Beach Hospital learning biology from Dr. Reynolds, what color the wall was in the receptionist's office. He'll tell you. He'll tell you which way the desk faced, right, left. He has this, it's a gift. Just certain people have it, probably Stephen Hawking's and whoever else has, it's an enhancement. And that's when Dan was enhanced, when he was taken on board the ship from Mayberry Park in Lakewood when he was 9 years old. He was enhanced purposely to try and heal this jrod. This is why I'm saying that the timelines change if you do certain procedures, or the economy does certain things, or we go to war certain ways and all that stuff. So Dan Burish is getting all this information, and Zygmunt Brzezinski was in the observation platform at the time. So at that time, they didn't have anybody suited up in this totally encapsulated suit to get him out of the clean sphere. So it took about a half an hour, and Zygmunt Brzezinski and whatever other group of Majestic watched all this. Asked Zygmunt. And so, and Dan was in a coma for about a day or two after that. When this being from another star system climbed up on his chest, they ramped up the pressure. They could have killed the jrod. Now this is a being from another star system. They're going to protect their guy, screw the other guy. Dan is saying, no, no, no. He had two means of communication. One was to the scientists who are doing all this research, and one is to security. So when he's saying no, 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 he's saying no, no, no to them not to ramp up the pressure to harm this being. They thought he was saying no, 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 stay away from me, jrod, because, and so there was a little confusion there. I had to get that straightened out. And he told them, but this is another explanation of that. When Dr. Dan Burish goes in to meet the jrod, he has to go through all these protocols of washing him with all these special liquids and all that stuff so he can't contaminate. So he has to go through this hallway or whatever, however they have it set up. And the protocol is you never turn back. Once you start down that gantry, you don't turn back. But just so happened one time, Admiral McConnell was there in his civvies and saw Dan, and Dan in his suit turned around and gave him a big hug. From that time on, Dan was a star. Everybody said, this is McConnell's guy. He's younger in age and seniority, but the main guy's hugging this guy, in the decontamination chamber. So from then on, Dan was king of the realm. Whatever he wanted, you're the main guy.
So Ron, you said that Dan Burish was abducted at the age of 9 for the purpose of
enhancement for the future, for
a
things.
little later when he would meet jrod.
Right, like 27 years later.
To help jrod get well.
Right, that's right.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that's...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so the second question I have is, you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that jrod had said to Dan, we don't put splints on things, or we don't heal ourselves.
This is the being in Varginha. That's a different.
Oh, different being.
Okay. That's a creature in Varginha.
Okay. We use our mind to heal ourselves.
Yeah, that's in Brazil. That had nothing to do with jrod.
Okay, but jrod obviously didn't have the ability to heal himself by his mind, or however the other beings.
No, obviously not, because they were trying to heal him.
Right.
And but part of that power of the mind addresses what the Black Ops want Dr. Dan Burish, microbiologist, Department of Defense, want him to do, which is to translate what the jrod says into English. So each time he would spend with the jrod, they would debrief him. But he only told them about 20%. But the Black Ops didn't pursue it too much. You know, they didn't want to irritate Dan, and you know, by asking too many questions. But this leads us to the big finale, which is that because of this looking glass device, they can turn it into a Stargate. There is a Stargate in Abydos, Egypt right now. There's a certain part of it, I have it diagrammed. And so the Black Ops was going to open this Stargate in December 2003. And so they needed to have Dan Burish there so that, and with the jrod. So there'd be Dan Burish and the jrod in the desert of Abydos, Egypt, when they opened this Stargate. Because they wanted to communicate, not like in the movie Stargate, but they wanted to communicate with these people that were going to arrive, possibly from Serpo. You're not talking about Serpo. That's what makes me think maybe Serpo's real. So they had Dan Burish there, and when they moved the jrod from one place to another, this clean sphere, I mean, what they had to do to get that in there originally is amazing. So they developed what I call a scooter with a dome over the top, like a Pope mobile kind of thing, you know. And they had this atmosphere in there because they had the jrod in there, and they're approaching this, what looked like from 100 yards, like a mud wall. And the plan is that whatever came through this interdimensional portal to the jrod, to Dan Burish. That's why I say the esoteric part of this is never addressed in ufology, because it's beyond their pay grade. They don't. I've studied esoteric things all my life. So what happened was, the jrod in his mind is appealing to Dr. Dan Burish. Help me, B&E, help me. I want to go home. He missed his wife and his child, just like we would. He wanted to get back to Zeta Reticuli. He's been here for over 50 years in this so-called ambassadorial suite. So Dan's saying, I can't do that, you know, I don't. But then Dan just said, screw it. So he hit that controller and forced that that scooter, whatever we call it, into the wall. J-Rod disappears, the scooter bounces back, Dan Burish bounces back, and with no clothes on, just stripped, and all of the Navy SEALs, black with automatic weapons, and McConnell's there, don't shoot, that's Dan, because he was thrown back onto the, whatever they have there, cement, something or other. So they had to medevac him out or to an aircraft carrier out there after that experience. So what's the implication, the inference? We need to have a whole section on inference and implications of all this, is that they have this interdimensional connection, either with physical things like a mud wall and but it has to be like in a place like Abydos, Egypt. People know Egypt as being a spiritual, in quotes, place, but it's much more than that. It's, you know, it's I mean, all of Egypt, and you get into ancient aliens. And Dan Burish is a genius at reading graphics and fractals and everything. He is deciphering right now. He has 500 individual diaries of UFO beings' writings, their writings. I think, I don't have it with me, but I have a sample.
Where did he get those from?
From the jrod, when he downloaded all his information. Then he wrote it all out, and that's part of his research.
So Ron, I had a question. We're hearing a lot these days about jumping. More Eisenhower and different people coming out and saying that they've been to Mars. So they go into a jump room and they jump. Was any of that ever discussed with any of the witnesses you met?
No, just that Dan Burish doesn't believe Serpo was true. But I don't think Dan knew too much about Serpo at the time.
Well, one of the most exciting things that I've learned today is that Edward Teller had personal interactions with aliens about
Oh
technology.
yeah, Bill Uhouse, I have it on camera. And Teller was at the head of the conference table in Los Alamos. And there were two beings there. And
They were
Nordics. And Dan Burish was at some meeting, not with Edward Teller. But if you go on my site, Alien Disclosure at Area 51, go to the appendix, and you will see a document, 3.5-page document, written by McConnell. Stanton Freeman wants signatures and watermarks. I mean, that brings up, I don't do that. Bob does that. I love you, man. But that's not my shtick. I'm not going to go there. I take the people around that hand me something, they know what they're talking about. So in this letter, it explains why Dan Burish was chosen, why Bob Lazar was chosen, and the background of all of this. This is by McConnell himself. So if somebody will download it or get the book, or the Kindle book, or you can download it from area51jrod.com, all of those documents are downloadable. So you can, it takes a while to do it, but for the in-depth researchers, which I'm hoping MUFON will flush them out of the woodwork, people like me that have been behind the scene, that will expand these bits of information.
Well, over the years, you've been giving or lending us hard copies of some of these documents.
Right.
Are those basically the same things that are on
Right.
the websites now?
Yeah, right. Some of the same things. So that, because in this field, Corso says it, they don't have to cover up anything. Ufologists will cover up by fighting among themselves. That just goes with the territory. And the people are people, and they want their book, their video, their shtick on it, But they're people, God bless them, Jim Mars and Linda Howe and Richard Dolan and Timothy Good. In fact, I'll just throw this as a good place to put this in there. I often say to people here in the hospital, and people, well, 30 years, give me the whole thing of UFOs in 2 minutes. I say to them, I'm sorry, but if you haven't read 3 books, I don't want to talk to you. You got to read Day After Roswell, Timothy Good's Above Top Secret, and what was the third book? Behold a Pale Horse. Yeah. Until you read those 3 books, don't talk to me, because you have no background, no context, nothing to contribute.
I do have several questions that I wanted to ask about.
Okay.
First one was, what's the status of the Eagles Disobey screenplay from 2004? Is that just...
I wrote a treatment on it, but it never went anywhere.
Okay.
I gave it to the screenwriter people, and it's in limbo now.
Right. Have you been personally threatened by people who do not want to see your whistleblower information released?
I've been visited by Homeland Security.
Okay, really?
And in a nice sort of way.
They identified themselves, sort of?
Yeah.
So it wasn't a covert?
No, they identified themselves and said, well, certain things shouldn't be talked about. It'd be a good idea.
Yeah.
But,
The covert visits are the bad ones.
Yeah.
Have you signed any contracts with individuals or entities that would control the publication or release of what
No.
we're talking about?
Well, no, nothing. On the anonymous story, I have total control of, I have a 13-page legal document that says that Ron Garner, Stargate Productions, has total control of everything, the videos, audios, everything. And that was signed in February of 2013.
So you got copyrights under Stargate?
Right, everything, yeah.
Okay.
And Daniel Sheehan, I just talked to him yesterday, went back and met with Anonymous in July of last year, where he verified everything I just said. Now, this leads to what I was saying earlier, that Majestic, there's the 12, sure, but there's all kinds of subordinates all over in academia, in the media, everywhere. They got them. And there's some kind of mind control. That's another discussion that you can have. And that, I'll just name them. So I'm not holding back. That's the thing I plan to tell people. Dan Burish still has security oaths. Ron Garner doesn't have security oaths. So I can tell you what's going on. So the mathematician at Caltech, his last name is Houneman, Hounman. He's Majestic. So when Majestic people saw the future, they saw in a future publication of Caltech, could be 50 years, I don't know, 100, who knows, in the future, something about the Ganesh particle. What's the Ganesh particle? So they decided to have Dr. Dan Burish, microbiologist, Department of Defense, find out about the Ganesh particle. Or they already knew that he knew about it, but go in depth. So Houneman set it up, and George, oh, he's a math. What is a math? Well, because that's what they do. They have overlapping technologies, and everything in the world is based on math, you know, in the universe, in Zeta Reticuli. Everything is math, you know, and someday we'll get there. So Houneman set it up for Dan Burish and his assistant then, his wife now, Marcia, to give this presentation at Caltech, April 2008. I was the cameraman. I have a video. I'll give it to you. And where he explains about the Ganesh particle. And he named it Ganesh because of the Hindu god Ganesh, the elephant god, which is a breaker of obstacles. So he explains this Ganesh particle. And this Ganesh particle heals anything it touches. It's a special kind of quartz crystal, and it sends out a little thing, and then it touches another cell, and that cell is healed. So in this presentation at Caltech, it's way beyond my pay grade and probably beyond Bob's. But at some point, we should show that to some microbiologists and, you know, people that are familiar with the field and analyze it. Is it baloney? Is it whatever? And I'll tell you the story, how he found it out. It's a fascinating story. They use remote viewers. So in 2001, the Black Ops people, I know who some of them were doing remote viewing. And they came up with the remote viewers that there was something on Frenchman's Mountains, about 10 miles from downtown Las Vegas, that was really important. So Dan goes up there in 2001, and he's just looking around, curiosity, and I've been there myself. It's in one of my videos. In fact, it's in the Caltech video. I show what's going on there. And this being just sort of appears out of the royal, like an Indian shaman guy. Where did you come from? And the Indian says, well, if you shine a light on that rock, it'll catch fire. Dan says, oh, really? And the guy just sort of wanders off or whatever. So Dan goes back home, he gets a laser, he shines it on the rock, it catches fire. Now this guy's 199 IQ, curiosity off the charts. He wants, how can that happen? How can a laser on this rock? So he began to analyze microbiology, the rock, the special crystal, quartz crystal. What does it mean? How does it work? And what he discovered was that this is an ancient, and this is what they're, this is just my opinion, Dan's not saying this, but this is the what they're trying to do in Switzerland with the God particle for billions of dollars. Dan did it for a few thousand. You know, the Hadron computer.